Hey, Dave Melinda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you. Do you remember as a kid when somebody would double dare you? And I remember and then they would double dog dare you. That was like top of the line, right? Well, I'm honored to be hanging out with Scott Anderson, who actually is the founder and CEO of Double Dare Executive Coaching. How are you today, Scott?
I'm great, Dave. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us, help me understand where you came up with Double Dare, because it brought me immediately back to when I was a kid, and it kind of got me
Yeah,
excited about it. So
yeah.
fill us
Thank
in.
you. Yeah, yeah. Me too. We must have had similar childhoods, but that's what it meant to me too. And I was starting when I was starting Double Dare. I had just sold a advertising and consulting business, and I had built the coaching practice within that agency, and that was kind of the way I was headed personally.
Okay.
So when I sold my agency to my partners, we had a great succession plan and a great buy sell agreement. But and part of it was that I could take the coaching business with me, and
Okay.
that was great. But they didn't want me to use my name or the same name because my name's in the advertising agency also.
Okay. Gotcha.
So I thought, what's the right name? And it occurred to me. So I've run and founded 9 businesses like you, right? A real serial entrepreneur. But this was, I felt like I had to sort of double dare myself and take this next step and make this turned out to be I guess sort of the 7th business. And and I also just like the idea of having some fun with all of this, to
Sure.
challenge people, but to try to challenge them in a fun way. And so, yeah, I'm double daring people all the time. My clients, I'm double daring all the time.
So and you're double daring anybody listening to call too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I double dare you.
Yeah.
Double dog dare you.
Yeah, double dog dare you. That's so
That's
cool.
right. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, yeah. Oh my gosh. As in preparing for this, the more I learned about you, the more excited I got about, unpacking this. Yeah, it's fun to start a business. It's fun to sell a business.
It
There's
is.
that middle ground of in my mind, it's like where you want to take it to the next level, but you're struggling to do that. So,
Yeah.
we'll kind of talk about some of that, but anybody that's, started 9 companies and actually sold 8 of them, has gone through it before. So, we're excited to kind of learn more about that. And also the cool part is you're a licensed mental health therapist as well.
Right.
So I got to
Yep.
really watch what I say, because,
Right.
I don't need anyone calling, knocking on my front door, asking me to commit myself.
Well,
So,
that's right. Well, Dave, if I get through that filter, I'm sure you will. We'll be fine.
yeah, that's so cool. So yeah, so one of the kind of the common themes that I saw in your coaching had to do with feeling stuck. You use
Sure.
the word burned out, you use the word
Right.
stalled. I really like those words as much as, we're trying to always be moving forward. There's times that we do get stuck. There's times that
Right.
we do burn out. So tell us, help us understand both from a business
Sure.
perspective, Scott, as well as from a mental health perspective. There's
Right.
some real danger in this burnout that we're seeing.
There
Um,
really is.
what's some things that tend to, what signs do you see, and what
Sure.
feedback do you have for people that might find themselves in this spot?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're so right that it's a challenge professionally, to people, and but it's also in a larger sense a big challenge, especially right now, for entrepreneurs as well as especially for their teammates, and going through COVID and all the associated issues over the last 9 months. Um, because COVID's been recognized, or excuse me, COVID's been recognized. It certainly has been recognized as a disease. Burnout has been recognized as a disorder by the World Health Organization, and also recently by the American Psychiatric Association as a bona fide disorder with unique symptoms. I first discovered it personally, actually, while I was running my advertising agency.
Okay.
And I find this is really true for entrepreneurs that, there's the thrill of starting something, there's the thrill of making it work.
Yep.
And then there can be a long period of scaling and tweaking and getting it just right that tends to lose a lot of entrepreneurs.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and often they plateau at that point and get
Yep.
really frustrated, stalled, as you said.
Sure.
And so I work with a lot of my clients on that. In particular, there's just sort of a normal, predictable arc to entrepreneurs' businesses. And it doesn't mean that they have to sell or get out or anything else, but it does
Sure.
mean usually they have to take another look at it and maybe rediscover what their role should be. And typically makes taking the business to the next level and shedding a lot of activity that maybe in the beginnings of the business, that they took on. But in a larger sense, to the when we think about entrepreneurs, but also their teams and employees generally in
Yeah.
the United States, burnout is off the charts right now, as is mental health challenges overall. And
Sure.
a Gallup a Gallup survey recently determined that over 60% of the American workforce says that they are burned out always at all
Yeah.
times.
Wow.
And that's 3 times the rate of people reporting being burned out at all times of just a year ago. Historically, 24, 23% of Americans report being burned out all the time, but
Okay.
it's gone up to over 60
Wow.
since COVID. And so, and the problem is that it does have some very serious implications. Not only are you miserable, typically people are really miserable. First and foremost, they report being exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically exhausted, and to the point that they can't really recover. Sleeping or even taking a little vacation doesn't help. They still report feeling exhausted, but that's sort of the tip of the iceberg.
Sure.
As bad as that is, it gets much worse, or
Wow.
can get much worse. And so problems that were pre-existing, especially mental health problems, substance abuse problems, really any financial problems, marital problems, child problems, really get exacerbated. And especially when we're all sort of have this cabin fever of being quarantined. And
Yeah.
so it can really, really get serious. And ultimately, it can lead to suicidal thinking and even suicide attempts.
Wow.
So it's a very serious thing. In spite of all of that, my clients and a lot of American businesses are reporting that 2020 will be their best year ever,
Right.
in spite of COVID, in spite of working from
Yep.
home, et cetera. And it's a tribute to entrepreneurship, I guess, but it's not sustainable
Sure.
in the long term.
And that's so interesting because, I mean, you bring that team part into it,
Right.
and I think it's so unique when you find leaders. A lot of them today are like this hands-off approach to their team. It's almost like, I built this team, you guys take it from here, you're responsible for yourselves. And
Right.
it's like, boy, us as leaders, we so need to be dialed into what our team health is,
Yeah.
all aspects of that health. So do you work with leaders as well as teams? Where do you fit
Absolutely.
into that mix then?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, I typically work with the owner, founder, entrepreneur, CEO, as well as their leadership teams, and sometimes much broader throughout the organization. And yeah, it really makes a difference. There's a great article in, I think, the Harvard Business Review that came out today, and it talked about the role of leadership in these times and with burnout. And on the one hand, owner founders aren't necessarily qualified or want the liability
Sure.
of providing advice or counsel, but we sometimes forget as leaders how powerful our reassurance can be, or merely being transparent enough to say, hey, I understand, I'm going through it too, this is really hard.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing can be extremely helpful. The other side of the coin is I've worked with a lot of my clients as uh, through, as a sort of a first aid for mental health, as in this case, working as a therapist.
Hmm.
And my very enlightened clients have allowed their employees to call me on a sort of a first aid basis for mental
Sure.
health.
Wow.
And I've really been able to see when you pull back the curtain of "I'm fine," which is what everybody says,
Yeah.
especially with high unemployment.
Right.
Um, Behind that, people aren't so fine. And um, fortunately, I mean, if there's a good side to this, it's that there are some specific skills that folks can use to prevent and recover from burnout. And what's cool about them from an efficiency standpoint is that you can teach these in a group setting. People can learn from each other in a group setting, and there's just tons of research that shows that they work. And this is what I've spent a lot of time doing on behalf of my clients through COVID, is creating programs like that.
Wow, that's so cool. I'm thinking that, so any AA, any anonymous program, right, that you've gone to, that people have gone through, or, the
Yeah,
first thing is to obviously admit that you have a problem.
exactly.
And I think, I remember back when I owned one of my companies, and it was kind of like, I have to say, I'm ashamed to admit it, but I'm going to tell you that I thought it was like a badge of honor for me to pull an all-nighter. And I can remember, 5 o'clock at night, the rest of the group would filter out, and I would be like, I'll be here for another couple hours. And then a couple
Yeah,
hours would come, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I had more than I thought. And I'm like, shoot, I'm here. I might as well stay a little bit. And before you know it, the sun's up. And I'm
yeah.
like, oh my gosh, I just stayed here all night. Right. And I used to
So yeah,
think, in my egotistical way, that was like really, like I kind of wore that badge around the office, really, like, I was something special. And now that I'm older and realizing, man, that's just, I mean, if it happens occasionally, I get it, right? But
yeah,
it's so unhealthy. And
yeah,
it's so, I mean, I'm seeing this research where, optimal work is like 75 minutes and then like a 15-minute mind shift.
exactly.
What are you seeing out there? What do you tell your clients, anyone listening, the entrepreneurs listening, what do you
Yeah,
tell them to try and, help them along once they say,
yeah,
yeah, you know what, I got this problem. What's kind of the
sure.
next step?
Yeah, I totally get the all-nighter. And I was even, I'd take it one step farther. Not only would I do a one-nighter, but the next day I'd sort of look at everybody with contempt who didn't have, I
Yep.
mean, to be a
Yeah.
complete asshole,
Yeah.
But anyway,
And you were wearing the same clothes, and people are
of
like,
course.
it's like, oh yeah, I've been, then you walk around like you're something special, right? Yeah.
So dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah, because as you say, I mean, the brain science just contradicts that. I mean, like you, I mean, there are occasions where it's necessary to really sprint and it can pay off.
Yep.
But, there's a psychologist at UCal Berkeley that I really, really follow named Christine Maslach, and she is pretty well regarded as the burnout authority worldwide.
Okay.
She created a inventory that's very well respected and researched as being the number one best way to determine whether you are burned out, and in what ways and to what degree. But
Gotcha.
she has this great term called sprint as marathon. And the problem with that I see in a lot of my client companies this year and in businesses in general is that the mentality is just that: sprint as marathon, sprint as a way of doing business, and working 60 or 70 or 80 hours a week, um, not just because we have something special to get done, but as a way of life.
Yeah.
And as you said, the brain science research really goes against that. And there's a lot of, we may be very busy, but how impactful is our action? I really recommend, and I'm sure you've heard of the Pomodoro method. It's
No,
very
I haven't.
similar.
No.
It's very similar to what you said. It's like
Okay.
75 minutes worth of work and
Okay.
15-minute break. Pomodoro is a little bit different timing. I think it's I think it's 25 minutes of work and 5-minute break,
Okay.
but it amounts to the same thing.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
the essential ingredient in there is recovery. There has to be time for these mini recoveries. And especially when we're under a lot of stress, kind of unrelenting stress.
You're right.
It's very much like if you think about athletes, there has to be, they can have micro tears in their
Yep.
muscle tissue, and that can actually build muscle. But if there's no recovery time, then it ultimately causes deeper tears and incapacitating injury.
Yeah.
And it's the same way psychologically that, and especially today, that if we don't have the opportunity to recover on a fairly regular basis from unrelenting stress, um, a couple of things happen. One is ultimately burnout can occur. I mean,
Okay.
if it's sprint as marathon, ultimately we get to the point where we may show up for 8 hours a week, but we're not going to contribute very much
Right.
value. And the other part of it is the injury, just like with the athlete. So that's the thing in the science that you quoted and the Pomodoro method that I'm talking about
Yeah.
is that if you build in these moments of mini recoveries, a lot of good things happen. You protect yourself from burnout, but more than that, you refresh your mind, body, and spirit so that you can go into the next thing. But this idea that that the amount of hours we put in will necessarily translate into impact and transformation just simply isn't borne out by data.
Wow. So more hours does not mean more impact.
Right. And as you say, culturally, working a bunch of hours is still in a lot of companies a badge of honor.
Yep.
And, really, it's so silly. Shouldn't we find a way to do a lot more work in a lot less time? As an entrepreneur, Dave, I'm sure that's, something that you discovered. I mean, there's no point in if you can get something done in 20 hours instead of 40, why spend 40? It's
Right.
just silly.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, the refresh piece, because,
Yeah.
let's face it, there's entrepreneurs listening right now, and they probably didn't even get this far in because they're so results oriented, right? They're like, screw this, man. I got something I got to do. But
I'm
maybe
busy.
they're on their, maybe they're taking a walk, maybe they're exercising, whatever. But the refresh piece, it doesn't, in my mind, when you list out work, words that match work,
Right.
refresh isn't one of them that just pops right to the top, right?
Exactly.
And it's so unique. In Milwaukee here, they show like best places to work. I'm sure they have it in
Sure.
Omaha,
Oh,
where
yes.
you are.
Yeah.
And you start doing some research and you start realizing that, I've seen places where they have pods for a 20 minutes a nap, because they
Sure.
realize that refresh is so important. So, are there ways, what do you suggest, in whether it's your 5 minutes, my 15, they
Yeah.
exactly equal the same amount. So
Sure.
in that refresh period, what are you suggesting that we do?
According to all of the research, including Dr. Maslach's research, the main thing is to disconnect from all of the stress sources. So, if it's possible to get, if you're whether you're working at home or working in a traditional brick and mortar setting,
Sure.
to get up from where you are physically, to stand, to walk around, but to be away from your electronics and even go outside and walk around for 5 minutes. The physical separation from what you're doing is really important, where you can't answer email or respond to text or take phone calls,
Well,
where
I can bring my
literally.
phone out with me though, Scott, right?
I know. And that's it. I mean, it's so easy to
I
stay
know.
so connected,
Yeah.
but it's disconnecting that's so important.
Yeah.
To kind of know, psychologically, to feel that in this moment I am disconnected. That's really important.
Yeah.
The second part of it really goes back to fundamental mindfulness theory, and or in other words, to be present where you are. And unfortunately, when we're on our keyboards and in Zoom meetings and what have you, um, we're not aware of our physical surroundings as much, and we tend to get into a very intellectual space, and one that can be very stressful. So one of the best things we can do is just to kind of come back and be where our hands are.
Sure.
And there are a variety of great techniques. One of the ones that I like, this comes out of a mode of therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, that I use.
Okay.
But the idea is to, there are a couple of exercises where you just sort of refresh your senses. So for example, try to hear the most distant sound you can hear is a great exercise. Let's say you've walked out of your office, whether home or brick and mortar.
Sure.
Just ask yourself, what's the most distant sound I can hear? Or what can I smell at this moment? What's the faintest smell that I can smell?
Sure.
What do I see in this room? Count the things that I see,
Okay.
and spend some moments looking at things. But essentially, it's coming back to the present moment, number one, and out of the projected future and the regretted past, and try to be right here, right now.
Sure.
And the benefits of basic mindfulness techniques like that, especially during your recovery break of 5 or 15 minutes, whatever it is, are very well documented. So anything we can do to get out of our heads, as Steve Hayes says, the guy who created ACT therapy, to get out of our heads and into our lives, is really the key. And if we can do that multiple times a day, these mini recoveries, these mini vacations, as I call them,
Yeah.
we're going to be a lot better off. And if sometimes employers are worried about, well, especially with work from home, are they working, or
Yeah.
are they watching television, or what are they doing?
Right.
And we really, I think, need to adopt, since remote work is just going to increase and increase now.
Sure.
I think
Yeah.
we're really going to have to move away from butts and chairs as a measure of productivity to work product and transformation and impact. Whether it takes somebody 5 minutes or 5 days,
Sure.
but measure more in terms of impact.
Butts in the seats. That's so funny, because I knew somebody years ago. They ran their company where you got your paycheck back before electronic deposit. Even you got your paycheck at 5 o'clock on Friday, and you had to be sitting at your desk in order to get that. If you weren't there, you didn't get your check, and it was like, wow. I mean, I can't even imagine that. But I know that, again, butts in the seats in their mind equals work getting done. But
exactly,
if impact is different for different people, and
right,
we do a lot of work with DISC, personality profiling,
yes,
different assessments like that.
Yeah.
So people are built different.
Exactly.
And so, it's really hard to put a mold in place that everybody has to fit into that. And what you're talking about here, Scott, on the self-awareness piece, when we do a lot of work with EQ and emotional intelligence, and it's like, some people really have a lot of blind spots. They just don't know what they don't know. And I think as leaders, and I'd love to hear your feedback on it, as leaders, It's kind of our responsibility, I feel, to help our team with their blind spots in a positive, encouraging way. Not, hey, dumbass, did you know you did this? But in an encouraging way that really makes that person feel way better than when they came in that day. So
exactly,
I'm interested to hear your feedback on that.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in it, and I've been fortunate to work for a lot of really enlightened companies and clients that believe in it as well. And we see this all the time, that it kind of boils down to micromanagement. I mean, that's what butts and chairs management is all about, right? Is that if I can breathe down your neck, then I have a higher level of confidence that you're doing something. And we simply know now that that's not necessarily true, and that different styles work for different people. The chief thing that the millennial workforce want, of course, is autonomy, and for them, most millennials, working from home is a remote work period is seen as a real benefit, more so even than more money. It's a very big positive. But I think it has to do with learning as leaders to learn coaching techniques
Yeah.
so that we get crystal clear with, and this is usually the disconnect. We don't as leaders communicate clearly enough what the project is, what the empowerment is, what the deadlines are, what the quality work has to be, et cetera. And we spend a lot of time micromanaging, but we don't spend nearly enough time setting up the projects in the first place and
Yeah.
getting crystal clear, allowing our teammates to get clear, and then really encourage them to use their talents to get it done. And we can ask for mile markers and checks and so forth, but generally speaking, if we're hiring the kind of people that are proactive and that thrive in most entrepreneurial scenarios,
Right.
um, it's really best to hire very carefully and let them do their thing. It's silly to hire people and not trust them.
Sure.
If we don't trust them, we should fire them, right?
Sure.
but
Exactly.
but no amount of micromanagement is gonna it'll actually increase the distrust. I also agree with you with DISC and emergenetics and predictive index and things like that
Yeah.
are so important. Give team leaders such an insight.
Oh yeah.
And you probably do this. I use more emergenetics than DISC, but similar in the sense that in a lot of emergenetics companies, they'll put the emergenetics map on the back when we went to work in offices
Yep.
on the person's office door or cube wall or whatever,
Right.
just to say, look, we're all different.
Yep.
And the way that I use the analogy sometimes, we sometimes were like bad members of the United Nations, and we scream Chinese at Russian speaking people,
Yeah.
and it just doesn't work.
Yeah. Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so if we can
Absolutely.
speak Chinese or Russian, we'll
Yep.
do better. That's
Yeah.
all.
No, and that makes so much sense. And when I speak around the country, do a lot of work on communication, and that's kind of on my 10 tips to better communicate. That's the first slide, is that in that 10 tips to better communicate, but it's in Russian. And so I
Nice. I love it.
right out of the gate, I'm like, hey, why doesn't somebody read this for me? And they're like, what? And I'm like, this is
Love
exactly
it.
how we communicate. If we don't understand our style and we don't understand the style of the person that we're communicating with, the
Perfect.
likelihood of us misaligning is pretty high.
I love that.
And it really kind of adds to all the stress we're talking about, the getting stuck. I mean, it's one thing to get stuck your car, and this in a snow drift, right?
Yeah.
And I just love watching somebody get stuck, and then for 15 minutes they just keep putting it in park and reverse and drive, thinking something magical is going to happen, right?
Yes,
And
exactly.
it's so funny because at work it's the same way. You have
Yeah.
this burnout going on. You're stuck, your team, your company, whatever, and
Yeah.
thinking that just reverse for just even kind of, I see people kind of rocking it. It's like, okay, we need sand, we need a wind, we need a winch, we need
Yeah.
something to pull us out of there, right?
Yeah.
Like, we don't have those things. And that's where I think coaches like you and I, are able to come alongside people and really, help
Yeah.
them out of that snowbank when they're stuck. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
There's no worse feeling, that's for sure. And the reason I got into coaching myself was because I was really, really stuck in one of my companies.
Okay.
And everything was fine, making money, great team, et cetera. But I just couldn't get out of my own way. I couldn't enjoy what I was doing. I couldn't really find my purpose. And I hired a coach pretty much at random, and very fortunately had a fantastic experience. But that was the feeling.
Yeah.
It's just this horrible paralysis,
Yeah.
and where coaches can be so, so powerful.
Yeah. And where do you go, right? And that's the hardest part. I mean,
Yes.
coach, consultant, trainer, all these words are intertwined.
Yeah.
I'm sure in some people's minds, they all mean something different. I look at it, I'm trying to think of it from a 6th grade education, because that's usually what I learn at. I need somebody to come alongside me and get me out of this ditch. You
Yeah.
know, I don't care what method necessarily. Some of
Yeah.
them might be more aggressive than others, and it might take me a couple of towing companies before I find one that fits, which is fine, right?
That's right.
But at the end of the day, why, you know, and that's kind of an entrepreneur's, flag, right? Is I don't need anybody. I can do this myself. You know, my dad did it himself. My grandpa did it. You know, I'm getting into these second and third generation
Oh yeah.
situations,
Yeah.
where it's like, man, my dad, he didn't need anybody. What the heck do I need you for, you know? And my
Yeah.
response always, Scott, is like, I don't know if you need me. I don't know. You probably don't, right? You want to
Yeah.
kind of fess up and say, you probably
Yeah.
don't. The weird thing is, though, is the two best athletes that I know are Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods. For some odd
Yeah.
reason, they needed multiple coaches. I mean,
Yeah.
Tiger's got a swing coach. He's got a mind coach. He's got more coaches probably than anybody. Why? What in the,
Yeah.
or like Phil Jackson and Michael
Yeah.
Jordan, what could Phil Jackson possibly, tell
Exactly.
best basketball players? And I'm like, I don't know the answer to that, but for some reason, this guy needed somebody to come alongside him. So it's entirely
Yeah.
possible that you need it as well. And, and I think it like really, when you talk about the team piece, the question that I'm looking at is, how do you, if you've determined a team's burned out, how do you re-energize that team? How do you,
Yeah.
instill your coaching into them? What are some things that you do, Scott?
Sure. Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, if a leader is burned out, if they have a great team, maybe they can continue to move the ship along. But
Yeah,
if the team is burned out, it means by definition that their productivity has gone down, their creativity has gone down. Certainly, their engagement in what they're doing has gone down.
yeah,
Their give a damn about the mission of the company and their personal roles has significantly eroded. So to get that back, there are a couple things. I mean, first and foremost, there's sort of this first aid that needs to happen, where the recovery techniques that I was describing earlier. That's typically where we start.
okay.
Um,
Is that
but
like a
the
triage thing, Scott, where you come in
exactly,
and you're like, okay, we need to plug the dam, stop the bleeding, whatever it is? That's kind of
yes,
the first triage move. Okay.
yeah, that's exactly right. So the first place to start is in a kind of a physical and beginnings of a psychological way, just to try to reinstill good habits. And as elementary as it sounds, I mean, it's really about, are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting enough exercise? Are you getting a good diet? Do you have enough time to recover? What's going on at home? I've talked frankly to more than a couple of clients who were having severe marital problems at home,
Sure.
and they would say I'm fine to their boss, but at home, they're in very abusive situations fueled by alcohol or drugs, gambling,
Sure.
all the things that can happen. So that's ground zero. The next step is to part of what happens, especially in this remote work setting, is that people necessarily pull back, and the kind of interaction, even for introverts, that they used to have is
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
And so we recommend reconnection techniques,
Okay.
to actually spend a few minutes and reach out to other people and reconnect with them. And admittedly, phone and Zoom is not the same thing as being with people, but to reconnect with people, with your teammates, is a really good place to start. Ultimately, what we also recommend, and this is how sort of to get what happens with a lot of people who are burned out, is that they lose sight of why they loved what they were doing, assuming that they were loving it at one point.
Sure.
And and they begin to get, people, especially in COVID, tend to get beaten down by what seems like outside influences and forces.
Right.
And so what we try to do is to say, okay, look, let's go back to your values. Let's go back to what's important to you as a person, irrespective of the company. What's important to you, because one of the big symptoms of burnout and of this quarantine situation is that people have stopped doing things that they love to do.
Yeah.
A lot of people stop, and they don't. It's not a black and white decision. It just happens so gradually you barely notice it. Anyway, we go back to people's personal values, and say, what is important to you? What makes life to you? Regardless of what your job wants from you, or what your boss wants from you, or what your customers or your investors or your market wants from you. What's important to you? And because even no matter what the circumstances, we can always behave in a way that's consistent with our own values. And so to rediscover those and to recommit to those, is often a turning point for a lot of people. They begin to discover, I'm not sort of a powerless victim in my life, but in fact there are a ton of decisions I get to make and have to make
Yeah,
if I'm going to be comfortable in my own skin.
sure.
So that's sort of specifically what's about. It's very personal. And
Yeah,
then ultimately hopefully to see connections back to the company and back to the role. What was it that I loved about this role at one
yeah.
point?
Wow, that's so
That
cool.
kind of thing.
Yeah. And so you bring up these words that like I have to write down because otherwise I'll forget. You started with like engagement, you were
Uh-huh.
talking about engagement, and oddly
Yes.
enough, Gallup, has a
Yes.
poll that says, 2 out of 3 people show up in their job every day and they're not engaged. They're doing as
That's
little
right.
as they can. They
Yeah.
love the phrase, it's not my job. I mean, they think it's a success if they like screwed around all day. How many times can we be on a call, on a personal call, whatever it is,
Yeah.
the majority, and it's sad to say, and it's not just a national thing, it's an international thing. But, we're running into these people that are not engaged. So, there's
Right.
kind of the opposite. Entrepreneurs, a lot of times I find, tend to think in black or white. I'm
Yeah.
either burnt out because I'm working a ton, or I'm working a ton, right? Or
Yeah.
I'm not engaged. And there's no in between. And therefore, that's where I think that badge of honor comes from, with the burnout piece. So
Yes.
I,
Yeah.
I I'm trying to help people realize you can be engaged and work 40 or 45 hours a week. I mean, those two don't necessarily, they're not, they're not opposites. You can do both. And
That's right.
so I think that's so cool. And that's why I wrote my book, Growing on Purpose, because there were so many people that are growing by mistake
Yeah.
because they're just kind of out there, right? And we found in our research that if you're not engaged, like you talked about, then your customer is not engaged either.
Yeah.
Because if you
Yeah.
have a team disinterested, not really caring, just kind of going through the motions, they portray that exact behavior to the customer. And then the
Exactly.
customer's going through the motions. And then we see sales drop, so
Yes.
but thanks for sharing with that. The other one I want to talk about here as we start to come in for a landing is
Yeah.
you talked about reconnecting. Okay. And I
Yeah.
love that because, but it also has, before I say why, it has like a negative to it, because you can reconnect and not be real.
Oh, of course.
So, I mean,
Of
I
course.
put down authenticity and vulnerability, 2 words that I like to utilize, as much as possible, because man, I don't want to connect with people much less reconnect if you're not authentic.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to be
Great points.
vulnerable, right? And say,
Yeah.
I'm having a bad day, if you're not going to be vulnerable in that situation, why even bother? And so when you
Yeah.
talk about re-energizing a team that's burnt out, we got to kind of like have this come to Jesus meeting, because otherwise we'll never get anywhere.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so talk a little bit more about the reconnection, some
Sure.
real
Sure.
stuff we can walk away with and implement right away here.
Sure. Well, one of the things, kind of a phrase that one of my business partners used to say all the time, is make it about them. And or in other words, um, and this is a mindset thing, but I think you can really just decide that I'm gonna make a point of, when I'm talking to a colleague, a teammate, a customer, especially, I'm going to make this call or this conversation or whatever it is all about them.
Yep.
I'm going to get out of my own head. And I'm going to try for that moment. And I use the expression to love them, because first of all, I think it really works and it's a great way to live. But if you can really love the one you're with,
Yeah.
Stephen Stills used to say,
Yep.
I mean, if you can really be with that person in that way, you'll feel better. You'll feel significantly better. I
Sure.
coach a lot of salespeople or in a lot of sales organizations.
Yep.
And one of the things I say to them if they're burned out is really listen. I mean, beyond hearing their words, at the deepest level of listening that you can come up with. Listen for their tone of voice. Listen to what they're not saying. Try to listen with your own spirit rather
Sure.
than with your ears, and love them. And it's amazingly transformative. I'm sure you're familiar with this. And at
Yeah.
first, it seems like, hey, I'm the one that's burned out. I'm the one that's suffering. What about me? Or I don't have it in me. And yet, people always do. So that's what I really mean by reconnecting.
Okay.
And because the very thing that burned out people begin to resent, and that's what's so dangerous about burnout,
Yeah.
people begin not to just become disconnected, but ultimately to have negative, cynical attitudes towards coworkers, even customers, partners, investors,
Sure.
etc. Um, we have to make a conscious effort, as counterintuitive as it is, to really love them and to make whatever we're talking about them, to listen at a level of as deep an empathy as we have available. And that, ironically or paradoxically, that does turn it around. I'm in my own way, that's the answer. It never
Sure.
fails.
That's so cool. That's awesome. And it's funny. So what I do when somebody, I say, hey, somebody says to me, what's going on? Right. Whatever they kind of that common theme
Yes.
of, of hi, right. I say, you're going on.
Yeah.
And they look at me, I go, man, this is all about you. And when
Yeah.
you say stuff like that to people, Scott, they kind of like don't know what to say. But
Yeah.
then when you back it up with, no, I'm serious,
Yeah.
what is going on? Tell me some stuff going on in your life, And it's so funny when
Yeah.
people go, how's it going? And I laugh when people go, not too bad. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, it's going bad, but it's not too bad, right? And
It's
so
tolerably bad.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I try and challenge people on that, going, what's going bad? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you just said it's going bad, just not too bad, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of that self-awareness piece again, that you just want people to kind of realize what it is right in that moment that's going on, because we're so off in other worlds so often, in our daily
That's right.
activity. And so, whether it's, and to me, and maybe this is a blind spot that I have, but I try and it feels like they're not being authentic. When somebody says, how's it going? Oh, fine. Like we talked
Yeah.
about before, fine. It's like, really? I mean, tell me something other than that,
Yeah.
I'd almost rather have like a multiple choice or, something other than fine, because,
Yeah.
I'm having a bad day. I'm having a great day. I'm not sure yet. I mean, something to just kind of really, help with that. So
Yeah.
th-
It
th-
seems like the sad truth right now is that a lot of people are just paddling as fast as they can to keep their nose above water.
yeah,
And, if we can remember that, that everybody has every bit as much on their plate right now as we do, and that we can afford to be generous with our time and our attention.
right,
And selfishly, when we do that, then life becomes life again all of a sudden.
right.
And burnout, at least for that moment, can be over.
Yeah. Is there there is a recovery, there is a healed side of burnout, right? You can recover
Yeah,
from it. You can look
exactly.
back at it as something you used to have. You don't have that anymore, correct?
Absolutely. And even if you just have a little bit of recovery from it, then you have more than perhaps your colleague or teammate who is really suffering.
Yeah.
And I think there in that recovery, there's a lot of humility and compassion that kind of comes out of it naturally.
Yeah.
But it's hard for people to find that gear but this really is the way out of burnout, and about, about so many of the problems we create for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and it's so funny because for me, my parents live in San Diego. So
Lucky
I would,
them.
yeah, I know I'm lucky, hey, even
Get the
though I can't go
memo,
out there
Dave.
now,
What
but
are you doing in Wisconsin?
I know exactly. I'm an only child and they left me. So if you guys
Oh
are listening,
no.
I still feel like you left me, right? But it's
Yeah.
so funny because, now I forgot where I was going. I had this great analogy too. So what were we
It'll
talking
come to you.
See, now I'm all thinking, now I got San Diego, like I just want to move
Sorry.
up there on my brain. So
Sorry.
no, it's all good. I was just we were going somewhere with it. So hey, that's live
I think it
broadcasting
was,
for you.
yeah, I think it was just, it was just mainly how you were
Where it is.
talking about. Yeah, go
Just you
ahead. Yeah.
talking, Scott, got me. So back when I would go fly out there, when
Yeah.
I owned my other company, when I did have burnout, I would
Yeah.
show up there and then I would work pretty much the whole time.
Yeah.
It wasn't really a vacation at all because all I did was change what the outdoor scenery looked like.
Yeah.
So when I sold that business and now in my coaching practice now, when I go out there in the last 8 years, I go out there and it's completely different. And my dad even says, "Hey, you got to work today?" And I'm like, "Dude,
Yeah.
I'm here for you, right?" And
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
just so I know there's a backside.
Yeah.
Sometimes it comes on you by work you do. Sometimes it's thrust upon you. But for people listening that are in the midst of burnout, there are great things that you can help that can help you. So tell me one thing as we land this plane today, Scott. Tell me one thing that the listeners probably don't know about you that you feel comfortable sharing.
Oh, gee. Um, yeah, there's a long list of things that when I, you know,
Well,
uh,
don't let your parole officer know, okay? So
yeah, yeah,
he's not
really. I've got,
listening.
yeah, thank God for the statute of limitations.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, I think I'm pretty safe in that respect today, thank God. But, I guess the thing that I would share is that, um, it's funny. I do a lot of speaking about, like you, about some of these chronic entrepreneurial problems.
Yeah.
I think it was Thoreau or one of those writers who said that men lead lives of quiet desperation. And I know that in my entrepreneurial career, there were lots and lots of times where I was quietly desperate.
Sure.
And the hardest thing, in a way, about being an entrepreneur is not having anybody to report it to,
Yeah.
and maybe particularly today. And the good news is that today there are some terrific organizations. One of my favorites is EO, or Entrepreneurs Organization. Is a great place to go and have a community with other entrepreneurs, and to form those kinds of connections. But there's just something so powerful in being heard and understood.
Yeah.
And in your practice, Dave, I'm sure that you know when you share your story about your own entrepreneurial life and experience, the good and the bad, um, you know, it 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 reduces the isolation.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
number one, which is, but that's a huge thing. That's not a small thing. And it's a little bit less lonely at the top. And so, I would just say for that, I had gone through a lot of that over my career, and
Gotcha.
wish that I had either taken advantage of things like coaching or organizations like EO sooner
Yeah.
than I did, because it's just made a huge difference for me personally.
That's awesome. Yeah. I do some sales advantage roundtables, and we're actually going to start a sales manager roundtable in 2021 because of the
Great.
fact that of that alienation. Where do
Yeah,
people go? I mean, where do sales managers
exactly.
go? Where do sales professionals go? I mean,
Yeah,
especially in competitive situations,
that's right.
you got to have this safe haven of
Yeah,
place to end up. So thanks for sharing that. So if people want to learn more about you, Scott, want to learn more about the Double Dare executive coaching, anything that we talked about today, what's
sure.
the best way for people to reach out to you?
The best way, thanks for that, Dave. The
Yeah.
best way is to go to our website, which is doubledareyou.us. And it's just as it sounds, doubledareyou.us. And we've got a lot of free materials there, including there's a lot of free information about ways of treating burnout. There's actually a burnout assessment at our site that people can check out. And then there's an executive briefing on burnout, what entrepreneurs and leaders can do about it, and checklists about what to do for burnout treatment. And so, yeah, but that's it. Doubledareyou.us. That'd be great.
Wow, that's so cool. So I'm looking up one last thing, and I think Double Dog Dare You is available. So maybe we
Nice to know. Nice to know, man.
Man,
I
I think we
like
should
that.
do that on steroids and just that thing.
Absolutely.
That'd be
Yeah.
awesome. So
Yeah. If Double Dare You isn't strong enough and you really want
exactly.
to take it.
Yeah. It's kind of like these energy drinks that have now the max, right? Like,
Exactly. I like
caffeine's
that.
not enough. Let's really inject it right into our veins. That's even better. So
I like it.
that's so cool. Well, Scott, this has flown by. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you, Dave.
unpacking this. I'm super. I took a ton of notes, so I want to learn. I got work to do. So
Well, thank you so much.
yeah,
It's great to meet you. I really enjoyed talking to you.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And again, hope hey, we travel the same circles. So once this opens up and they allow speakers to travel again, I'd be honored to share a stage with
I
you.
hope so. Me too. Thank you,
Awesome.
Dave.
Thank you.
Take good care.